Good morning and welcome to the Morning Spotlight Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hamm, coming to you as always from the Spotlight Studios here in Morristown, New Jersey. There is a sleeping giant in every human. My guest today's purpose in life is to awaken those giants within and turn them into legends by helping them grab what they believe is just out of their grasp. He is a heart surgeon without a blade. He does not start outside with what you need to do. He starts inside with who you are. As a human behavior and performance coach, speaker, and business strategist, he disrupts the normative approach on how to create sustainable growth and lasting change personally and professionally. His philosophies have helped individuals and companies discover and activate their limitless potential, and he and his team lead with intentionality as they are driven by their vision to impact 1 billion lives, that's billion with a B, by 2045. He is Brian Bogert. Brian, welcome to the show.
Man, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming on. So you got connected with me through Steve Sims, and I'm just going to put it out there. Steve was a guest on this show. We've had other guests come through Steve. Every single guest has been awesome. So no pressure, but you have a lot to live up to.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Steve runs with some good people, man. It's funny. I was texting with him earlier today. In fact, he's the real deal.
Yeah, he definitely is. But like I told you before we got started, I've been on a Brian Bogert rabbit hole for the last hour. And I have no
That's terrifying
doubts.
For anybody who's listening. I would not recommend it, but
well, I would, because there's obviously a lot of good stuff in there. But we're going to cover a lot of good stuff today too. So maybe get some snippets, and then you go down the rabbit hole after that. But talk to me a little bit about, let's just kind of define who you are, what you do, and that kind of stuff, so people know who they're listening to. We talked about it in the bio, but just give me who's Brian Bogert?
Yeah, so who I am, man, I love that you asked that question, because I'm all about the who in general. So who I am is somebody who's deeply fascinated in the who. Who I am is a husband, I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a son, and I'm a confidant. I'm intellectually curious, and I'm fascinated by the way we operate, the way we connect, the overall human experience. And so I learned very early through some very painful experiences, some deep perspective that's really pointed me at what's important in life. And, as you heard in the bio, it's really propelled us forward, because we want to reduce the level of suffering on this planet by helping people experiencing joy, freedom, and fulfillment holistically. And that impact of 1 billion lives puts us in a position to leave a better world for my kids and my grandkids, brother.
Yeah, I love that. And I do want to, you mentioned the pain and stuff like that. So I do want to hear that story on this show, because I'm sure we're going to get to it eventually. So I want to talk about it right now.
We'll get there.
Yeah. So let's do that right now. Talk to me about the pain. Let's do that first.
Yeah. So I'm going to just go right at it, right? I'm going to save some of the drama, because I have a feeling we're going to have a bunch of additional value conversation. So look, here's the deal. When I was 7, I was run over by a truck. My left arm was completely severed from my body. It was reattached. I had 24 surgeries over the following years. I was blessed that day because there was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this took place. She saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her, and she rushed immediately into action, which I'm forever indebted for. She came over, stopped the main bleeding on the wound, and she also instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, and get my detached limb on ice within minutes, right? Reality of it is, you did research. You went down the rabbit hole. Probably many of your listeners weren't expecting it to go there today, right? When you were like, what's the pain part? They were not expecting
No, they were not
right?
ready for that. Definitely not.
I have gotten very used to seeing jaws drop to the floor in disbelief over the years. But I will tell you that although I know I've got a very unique story, what I've learned in all my period of time of doing this is that we all have unique stories. What's important is that we pause, become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories, and then become intentional in how we apply those in our lives moving forward. And we all have the ability to do that. And we all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. So, that's a very high level of what happened. And it's really propelled me forward with kind of 2 primary lessons that have guided a whole lot of what we do. One, I learned very, very early not to get stuck by what has happened to me, but instead get moved by what I can do with it. And what I've learned over all these years is the more I move with what I can do with it, I'm also able to move people, and moved people move people. So that is something that we absolutely lean into. And the other one is kind of my life's philosophy. It's this idea of embracing pain to avoid suffering. And when done right, I think it's also how we gain freedom. And so a whole lot of these things bucket into philosophies, teachings, principles that we have, but we don't sell on strategy and tactics. We sell on true transformation.
Right. I love that. And so I'm just going to put this out there because, like I said, I was down the Brian Bogert rabbit hole. I've heard that story before, and I want to make sure that we put it out there so that my listeners know what you're all about. 3 different podcasts you were a guest on. I will not say which ones they were. When you told that story, each time at the end, you said it was a 115-degree day in Arizona. The biggest, That's what the biggest O was, not the car running over your body and severing your left arm, but I just thought that was interesting. I'm like, dude, like he got ran over by a car. It's like a 115-degree day. We've all been there, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the part that I gave you the really Reader's Digest version.
Right.
But there's a little bit of drama with that, because the reality of it is when that muscle came out of my arm, it was cooking on the pavement.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So whatever came out of my arm was not able to be put back in my arm. So that's a whole nother part of the story. But that 115-degree day, it's literally ground meat, ground hamburger that's cooking on the pavement.
Wild stuff. So, I like that you talked about those two lessons that, you took from that, and you were 7, right, when that happened to you, which I would imagine like that just puts a 7-year-old in just a totally different world than what most 7-year-olds grow up like. So maybe take me through like that part. Like let's do that too. Like from 7 to where you are now. I mean, like having just such a different childhood. I'm sure like your parents had different experiences than most parents would have. Obviously not like, way worse. I'm sure people have dealt with way worse. But talk to me about that, like what that was like and how that childhood maybe shaped you moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, I just want to comment on what you just said, because I think it's really important. That's also why I give that normalization comment on we all have stories. Reality of it is my story is my story. My truth is my truth. It's going to be better, worse, more extreme, less extreme than anybody who's listening today.
Yep.
And so by the sake of me sharing, it's only to allow my truth to give you permission to live yours. It's not to say that any of this is that impressive. It's just my reality.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy that you said that. Here's the thing. When that happens to you, it's impossible to not feel sorry for yourself right out of the gate.
Sure.
I don't care if you're 7, 5, 15, or 50, right? The reality of it is when you have something traumatic happen to you, your body, and shapes your reality instantaneously into a new direction, right? There is a grieving process that takes place. There's denial. There's all these pieces. But I was snapped out of that pretty quickly,
right?
Because I ended up securing that I knew I had my life. I'll tell you, though, that what started to happen after that was 2 things. One, I never wanted to be the center of attention, and I exactly was, because I had a story that caught the news.
Yeah.
Right. You don't hear about a kid getting his ripped off every single day.
Right.
And so there was a lot of attention that was taking place in a place and around a topic, frankly, that I didn't really want the attention. And second, I was being immediately viewed through other people's lenses of what they'd be capable of in my scenario.
Right.
So I was immediately being limited. I was immediately being placed into these situations where people just thought I could or couldn't do certain things. And then very often I also had to justify the truth of my own story. Because people would ask me when I was 7 and 8 what happened, and I'd tell them that thing, and literally they'd look to my parents instantaneously for validation. Is he telling the truth?
Yeah,
because they were expecting me to say I fell off my bike or fell off the jungle gym or flew off a swing trying to do some cool dismount. Right. But no, when they hear that, they always have to do that. So all of a sudden I'm like, okay, the world's not believing me in my own story. The world doesn't actually believe what I'm capable of, whether or not I believe I'm capable of it. And all of a sudden, right, I'm getting all this attention for something that I didn't really care about. So what did I do? I created an intellectual narrative and I shut off in certain ways, which was I'm good, I'm strong, I'm capable, I can do anything myself. And I did that very, very well. And so that whole next period of my life was all about turmoil and struggle. I mean, 5 years of therapy, 5 years of intensive occupational therapy, 3 days a week, 6 o'clock in the morning before elementary school, right? Like to say that I learned what work ethic was in that period of time would be an understatement,
right? Because
there was no other option. And I was in a fog, but my parents weren't. They were guiding me through the process.
Yeah.
Okay. So you fast forward on this mental narrative of what I'm doing. Mental toughness skyrocketed. If I set my mind to it, I knew I could accomplish it. And what I didn't realize back then, but it was around having to avoid the attention and also minimize certain things, is my emotional intelligence shot through the roof.
Right.
So I started to be able to read people and read situations and very much understand what those things meant. That served me well for a very long time. You know, if you went down the rabbit hole, you'll know some of these things. So I'm trying to fast forward you to current day as best as possible. Yeah. Call it 20 years old, I go down and I re-break my arm in a snowboarding injury. Almost lost it again.
The left arm.
The left arm.
Okay.
Literally compound fracture in the same spot it came off at.
Jesus.
Okay. And immediately I went into this place where it was like, oh, okay, I got air evac to a hospital. I was in a state where I had no family. Nobody knew my story.
Right.
And so I had to just go into this pain cave of like, nope, I'm going to get through this and do what I need to do. They didn't follow the standard procedures. Following 10 months, I went through 7 surgeons who were all afraid to touch me because of medical malpractice. They wouldn't touch me.
Yeah.
They did all these different treatments. And at the end of the day, all I had done was heal by creating scar tissue between the two bone segments, and my arm was still dangling there with a loose bone.
Yeah.
10 months later.
Right.
Ended up getting all that repaired. But here's what I learned in that period of time. My mental narrative was really, really powerful.
Yeah.
The world bought into it.
Right.
Right. All of a sudden, I'm in a position where, guess what? Nobody was there. And it wasn't because I wasn't there. It wasn't because I didn't have friends. It wasn't because I didn't have all these things. It's because I was strong. I was capable. I could do anything, and I didn't need anybody's help. So everybody just figured I was fine.
Yeah.
So in a period of time where I was the most vulnerable I'd ever been, I also didn't have the courage to ask for help. And I realized at that time that mental toughness, although it was very, very strong, it also eliminated my ability to connect with humans. So I went into that human connection period.
Yeah. Which I think is really interesting, because like it's interesting to me in the sense that like you weren't looking for attention, and you almost went isolated like to yourself. Right. But then that like led you to become even stronger, and then eventually start to connect with other humans, because like that's literally like what you do now, like that you are all about connections. Right. That's
literally all I'm about.
Yeah. So like take me through that shift. Take me through the shift from being like the isolated Brian to like starting with those human connections and making sure that your mental narrative was strong enough that even though people were just like, you could have the strongest mental narrative in the world, but that doesn't change like how maybe I see you or someone else sees you, right? I mean, like we all have our preconceived notions, like you were talking about before, about like what you have to be all about because you went through this traumatic experience. So take me through like maybe it was like a slow process of trying to like regain trust in people that they're going to see you for who you actually are rather than through my own lens.
Yeah. It's something that I didn't really start to reflect and unpack until these last few years. And I think it goes to one of our core concepts. And I think it was really just truly an evolutionary response to how I was conditioned to deal with pain. Right. So a couple of things happened in this period of time. All of us, I believe, are hardwired around four things. We all desire to feel safe. We all desire to feel protected. We all desire to feel seen and understood. And we all desire to feel connected. Okay. Connected is the one that we care most about. The reality of it is if we don't get the first three, the last one doesn't even happen.
Right.
And so what happened? I felt unsafe. I was put into a position of complete trauma. The walls went up all the way around me. In fact, one of my occupational therapists back then, I think in the hospital for the very first time, they did an exercise with a doll and they gave me casting material. And what I did at that time, I literally wrapped the entire doll head to toe in casting material, which they just thought was fun. But there was also one of these things where the OT interpreted that to say, oh, he's on complete overwhelm. He's going internal. He can't connect. We can't be poking him. We can't be prodding him. I was just doing everything I could to keep myself safe and protected.
Yeah.
Right. And so when that wall went up, guess what? It prevented people from being able to see and understand me, but they also didn't already because they couldn't process what was taking place.
Right.
So even if I had been able to have my walls down, I wouldn't have allowed me to connect in a different way. Okay. And so I think I just perpetuated this. The more time went on, the stronger my energy and my power got. I also retreated further and further into myself and actually denied more and more about who I was.
Right.
So when I shifted to this human connection period after my snowboarding accident, I realized that vulnerability and authenticity are the glue that binds human connection. And so that was really a period that served me for the next decade. And it allowed me to, in that moment of clarity, when I realized, oh my gosh, my mental narrative is what absolutely is preventing me from having what I want, I started to connect with people in a different way. I started to learn how to get their walls down. I started to learn how to make them vulnerable, how to make them authentic. I didn't realize at the time I wasn't doing it for myself.
Right.
It wasn't until my early 30s when I started crying on the couch with my daughter and I realized that I'd never felt in the way that I really could be feeling, that I realized that human connection without emotion isn't really human connection.
Yeah.
Right. And here's the beautiful part. It all comes full circle because when I actually retreated in myself, when I shut off the physical pain because it had surpassed my ability to cope, I also shut off emotional pain. And I didn't realize it for 25 years.
Right.
And so it was that entry that then put me on the path to where I am now, which is all about human connection. It's all about emotions. It's all about mental and emotional narratives and how do we balance and regulate between the two so that we can see ourselves more clearly.
You know what I think is interesting too, like when you're talking about the four things that people need, right? So the last one you said was connection. I got that right? Nailed it.
Yep.
So this is just me from like an outsider's perspective looking at like this whole thing and like looking at your story and maybe what other people do and kind of my own journey throughout my life is that people tend to put that last one like first and at the top of the food chain. Like I need to feel connected so that I feel all those things, safe and everything else. So then I think people lose what you were able to gain through those things. And then they're not able to actually like have real authentic connections because they're just facades, So like maybe when you're working with people, like how do you get them to kind of turn that around and kind of put them maybe in the proper order? I don't know if there's a proper order, but maybe
No. Again, I don't know that there is a proper order, but I do think that the two that have to happen first. Well, I believe that the thing that has to happen first is we have to feel protected.
Yeah.
So that we can feel safe.
Right.
When I say safe and protected, those aren't always the same thing. And so oftentimes here's the trick. Okay. That a lot of people lose sight of. I'm a big believer that everything begins and ends with you. So you could sit here and be like, well, I don't have anyone in my life that can protect me. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Right. But guess what? The world has conditioned us to believe that nobody's protecting us.
Right.
That nobody has our back. It happens, by the way, in my own marriage, where our walls can go up all of a sudden because something happens, we get triggered in some way, and all of a sudden we aren't seeing each other or connecting with each other. Because that's what happens. When we don't feel protected, our next state is to go to safety. So we protect ourselves. That's what I was saying earlier is the armor went up. Here's what happens when our armor goes up. We literally prevent, it's like a force field, a wall, a barrier, literally. We prevent people from being able to see and understand us. And we prevent being able to truly and authentically connect. Okay. What we also do when that wall goes up is we're preventing then exactly what we want and exactly what we're desiring. Yet we're going to sit here still and point blame that, oh, geez, well, I'm not feeling. No. We need to understand that oftentimes it's our own wall that project that into the world. Because when you walk into a room with your wall up, who wants to see and understand you? Who wants to connect with you? They can feel and sense the energy. We all know what that looks like. What we also know is that what happens when we do that is we literally start chopping stuff off. When we create this container, right? Anything that doesn't affect us or we don't feel is real, we just shove down because that's what the world teaches us. If we want to connect, show up with a smile on your face, show up and move fast, make sure that everybody can bond with you, make sure that you have things that are relatable, relevant, and credible. And if you post stuff online, make sure it's to those people that can connect with you. Okay, cool. Why don't you just be you, first of all? But to the whole point of what I'm making, we chop off all the real stuff and we start shoving things down into this container behind the armor. All of a sudden, what we start doing as well is building pressure and pressure and pressure in this armor until at some point it explodes and we've lost who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I've always.
So what I work with people on is help them see who they are first and then start to allow them to recognize that we can actually create levels of protection, not just around us, but the environments that we're in. So true leaders have the ability to see who they are and know that they are unaffected by those external factors. They no longer need to be protected. They can be the source of protection in a household, in a business, in a community, in a philanthropic effort. And so instead of feeling like as the leader of an organization, everybody's against me, everybody's out to get me, what if I go in and assume that I'm safe and I don't need to protect myself and I can bring down my walls and allow vulnerability and authenticity to shine through, which again are the glue that binds human connection. Now all of a sudden, I'm creating a realm of safety for everyone else. They no longer have to have armor up. I can influence the whole environment.
Yeah. I love that. And one of the things that I think, or that you mentioned in that answer, which I think is like, we've talked about this on this show before, what you want and what you desire. Right. And I think that sometimes like when people do put that human connection up front and they don't kind of tap into what's going on inside, they don't know what they want. They don't know like what they desire. They're just kind of like drifting aimlessly through life. Right. So like, is that kind of how you're able to get back in tune with what it is that you do want? Because I think so just to kind of give you like a backstory, a lot of the people that listen to this show are between the ages of 25 and 35. So they're either working corporate jobs and want to get out or do something else, or they feel unfulfilled, like a lot of different kinds of people like that. So, but that's what, maybe their parents told them to do, or maybe that's what, like you said, society has told you to do. So you never really get a chance to like actually check out like what you actually want to do. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't until I started this and I was like, holy crap, like I love doing this. This is so much fun. I want to keep doing it. And it was just like a random kind of
very real and authentic for you. And it's obvious the way you transfer energy through a conversition.
Right. It's just like
you're leaning in.
Exactly. And but I think that if like that was just kind of, it was a COVID project that I started and it was just kind of like the light switch went off. And so I think that that's interesting because I feel like how do you try to tap into like what people actually desire? Because I think that especially if I'm 31. So if I hadn't tapped into this, I would have gone 31 years with like drifting aimlessly, like not knowing what I actually wanted, working my job and doing what I do. And, maybe not even realizing it, but being unfulfilled. So how do you try to tap into that and kind of like course correct that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways I could take this, but I'm gonna talk about the abstract part first, and then we can get like practical if we need to expand on it further. I mean, what you just outlined is a core part of what we do, is getting people back to the core of who they are. I'm a big believer that who has to come before what, but we are conditioned to have what before who, right? From the time we're this big, we're told what to think, what to wear, what to drive, what jobs to have, what friends to have, what way to look, what way is appropriate. I mean, literally, from the time we were born, we're told of all the what's of the world. And that's what we're taught to chase. What house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success. I did that. I had everything I ever wanted by the time I was 27.
Right.
And it guaranteed that I lost who I was. Here's what we have to realize is every single time we lean into one of the what's the world has told us, we're literally fitting further and further into the box they've defined for us to be accepted within. And so what we need to do is to remember who we are before the world told us who to be. But what happens is every time there's a what, we get a layer put on top of us, right? I could say, Mike, that's the wrong hat to be wearing, bro. You need to change that hat. All of a sudden you're like, oh shit, nobody wants me to be in this hat. So you put a layer on top, which is further away from who your authentic self is.
Right.
Be like, Mike, dude, that striped shirt with that logo. I mean, it's kind of cool that it supports your podcast, but it's gray, bro. Like we're in this colored world now. Like, do you really want to like be out, right? You could sit here and say all these things and all of a sudden there's another layer of what?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that shirt's wrong. And so where I would point people is to recognize that if you don't know what you want, it means that you've got way too many layers that you need to shed to get back to the core of who you are.
Yeah.
So a really quick way to start, really quick way to start to see what energetically connects with you. Because I don't know, that's what I said when you said, yo, if I didn't find this, dude, your energy is real. Right. You're in your zone. You're in flow. This is authentic. And I feel like if I met you in person, it's exactly who I'd meet.
Yeah.
Mike across the screen for me. Right.
And it wouldn't have been that way.
It's not fabricated.
Yeah. It wouldn't have been that way 2 years ago. Like you would have got a totally different person. Right.
Totally agree with that. But that's my point is as you lean into this, energetically, you become more and more who you are every single day that goes on. And all the what's in your world, by the way, will be a manifestation of who you are. Right. This podcast is an example of it. So a simple step, create 2 lists. On one list, I want you to literally write down all the people, sources of information, places, environments, whatever you consume in your world that makes you feel good, that lifts you up, that lights you up, that puts you into flow state, that you could spend 8 hours and it feels like 1, that you want to run through walls for the people that you're doing it with and for, right? We all know what that feels like. Yeah. We all know. And those moments are great, but they seem fleeting sometimes. Counter lists, people, places, sources of information, environments, all the stuff that you interact with, all the same things on the other list that leave you feeling depleted, that leave you feeling defeated, that leave you feeling unworthy, that 1 hour feels like 8, that you literally feel like you're slamming your head against the wall instead of running through it. Yeah. That you do not get energized at all to get up and get going. We all know what that feels like too. Yet so many of us don't take any level of awareness or intentionality around these 2 things to eliminate or reduce the number of things on this list and live more and more into the authentic one. Yeah. If that's all somebody took from this podcast, they will get value in leaning closer into who they are. Because if you spend more time in the things that light you up, you will find your path and who you are as long as you stay regular and consistent in your effort to do so. Yeah.
So I want to go back to one of the lessons that you were talking about from the initial pains. Perfect. And that's embrace pain and avoid suffering. Now, people that are listening to this show would say, well, why are you saying embrace the pain if the stuff that's on the other list, you know what I mean? You know what I'm asking here? So like if it's on the other list, the list that is sapping you dry of any excitement or enthusiasm or happiness, like why are you going to embrace that? Like take me through that and like what that actually means. Embrace pain and avoid suffering.
Such a beautiful tee up, Mike. Such a beautiful tee up.
Softball, that was well baby.
Done. You just like gave me this big fat one right there I get to swing at. So I think we have to understand the difference between pain and suffering. That's really what it comes down to. Because just to your point, it's like, oh, yeah, you could listen to the first answer of what I said. And it's like, oh, I'm telling you to embrace the pain. But what are we avoiding over here? It's suffering. Okay. Right. So let's understand this just really, really clearly. Pain is defined as short-term, intermittent, a direct cause from something and alleviated once that direct cause is removed. Then we as human beings screw it up like we do everything else and put adjectives in front of it like acute and chronic. Now, acute maintains the definition, but chronic inherently changes it because it implies that it's no longer short-term and it persists after that direct cause is removed. So let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it really is, suffering. Right. Okay. Now we don't want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. Whereas pain gets tons of attention because it's a natural evolutionary response to survival. Okay. And we don't like it. We don't want to be in it. So understand this concept. We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of being stuck in a loveless marriage that's going to end in divorce, or being stuck in a marriage when you actually want divorce. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile device at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation we'll never get back. We can embrace the pain of breaking up with our business partner because they are a cancer in our culture and drag us down to avoid the suffering of not ever having the impact or growth in our lives that we desire. Right? We can embrace the pain literally of going to see counseling, embracing the feelings, emotions, trauma of the pain that we've experienced in prior periods of last to avoid the suffering of repeating the exact same cycle over and over and over again in our lives.
Right.
That's this concept. And so when I say get away from the negative list, if it's there, it's something that's regular and consistent, you're experiencing it. It's not just painful in those moments, it's creating suffering. And I believe that we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I love the way that you kind of like break that down because like you said, I mean, people think of pain and suffering basically like as one, like they're the same thing, but they're not. Like it's, you know, you get to choose, like embrace the stuff. I mean, everyone's going to experience pain. Like I'm a big believer, like you got to show up as 100% of you as you possibly can. But that 100% is going to fluctuate day to day because you don't know what kind of pain you're going to run into that particular day.
Yep.
Right. So like doing something like this and putting yourself out there and being 100% you, it's always going to be a little bit different. But as soon as you start like embracing it and knowing that that's going to happen, you start suffering less. And I love that. So one of the things you mentioned earlier in an earlier answer that I think is going to tie into that one as well. I'm doing a great job kind of weaving this one together, just as an FYI. But
hey, virtual high five, Mike.
Thanks.
Virtual high
Thanks,
five,
Brian. But one of the things that you mentioned before was that you had everything you wanted by the age of 27, I think you said. Yeah. Is that, and so, but there was something going on. I think you said that you weren't going to be fulfilled or whatever the answer was there. But was that you embracing that pain and then avoiding the suffering? Because you're clearly not doing whatever it was you were doing before. You said that this has been a journey over the last few years. So take me through like that shift for you personally.
Yeah. So, 27 is probably not when the light bulb went off, but that's when it actually happened. Right. And so what's funny is I was in this position where I had sought out and set all of these intentions, all these visions, all these goals, by the way, all the what's that the world told me to chase that I had to prove to myself and to the world that I could do. Right. I literally had everything set up around age 30.
Yeah.
And I had it all by age 27, house, car, money. And I don't say any of this to brag. I don't say any of this to impress. I say to impress upon the point. Because here's all of a sudden, as I woke up one day, running in circles with people making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, and 8 figures in some cases, realizing that I was miserable.
Yeah.
Realizing that I'd lost who I was. And by the way, so many of them were as well, because they hadn't actually done the fundamental work to do it. They'd gotten all the what's the world had told them to chase, but very few of them had found what we all want. Deep level of connection, deep level of joy, deep level of fulfillment, deep level of freedom in the way that we operated. And so that's when I started to really unpack things. It wasn't long after that we had kids. And it was about 6 months after having kids that I realized that I was not the man, husband, and father that I always said I was going to be.
Yeah.
And so what happened there was that I had always said publicly, adamantly to my wife that everything I was doing was for the benefit of my family. Everything, right? 6 months went by and I missed the first 6 months of my kid's life, other than the first week that I took off, because I never readjusted my life. I never actually took toll on where I was heading, who I was, what I wanted to accomplish, who I wanted to impact, who I wanted to do this for, who I wanted to do this with. And so I just still was going through the motions. So it was that time that I took a step back, and it was actually the first time I hired a coach. I interviewed 14 coaches, by the way, and the first 13 were an inch deep and a mile wide, had zero relevance or credibility to anything I wanted, but they went and got coach certified. They definitely could tell me all these systems for success, the 7 tools that I needed to get to there. And I was like, okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah.
And then I found somebody that was a little different. Ben Newman is his name. He's solid, and I'm forever indebted to him. And he, within a month of working him, said, Brian, you got to be doing this. So what are you talking about? He goes, you need to be coaching and speaking. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm paying you a lot of money not to tell me how great I am, but help me figure out these other things. He's like, no, bud. I really think, like, okay, cool. Yeah, whatever. Put it off to the side. He trickled it for 9 months. And then the universe sent me a sign. And so one of the reasons I'm forever indebted to him is not just what he gave me and as it related to my ability to be more aware and intentional in my own life, but he told me very early what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. He told me very early what he saw in me. And so that was the beginning of the process of really unpacking. And it was my wife that in summer of 2019 was the one who finally gave me a kick and said, it's time.
Yeah.
And so it's not lost on me. But the reason I say is we also have to put ourselves into a vulnerable position is that sometimes we don't see ourselves clearly. Sometimes we don't see our blind spots clearly. But if we put ourselves to actively seek outside information and see where it aligns with who we are and what we're feeling and who we want to impact and where we want to go, all of a sudden we can get some more variables and information to allow us to see ourselves more clearly. Those were two situations where an outside force told me something I didn't want to hear, I needed to hear, and the result is significant.
Right. So take me deeper into that, because like you have two people that are obviously very important in your life that told you what you needed to hear, not necessarily what you wanted to hear. But just as humans, we tend to try to surround ourselves with people that think like us and are going to tell us exactly what we want to hear so that we're never going to be wrong. So how do you like weed out those people? I mean, I know you said you interviewed 13 coaches prior to actually interviewing, what do you say, Brian, his name was?
Ben Newman.
Yep. Sorry, Brian. You're Brian. But take me through like that, because I think that is something that people struggle with. They put their trust in the wrong people, and it leads them down paths. Maybe putting that human connection first, and we talked about before. But talk to me about like weeding through and finding those people that are going to do what those people did for you.
Yeah, I think so often people are conditioned to not listen to their gut. Right. To not listen to themselves, their own internal voice. And so I think both of these situations were, you talked about the coaches that I interviewed and what I was actually doing. I really had to make my internal voice louder than the voices of the world. Even when we sought out to do what we're doing, after we executed this buy sell and we ended up coming and building what we're building now. For the first year and a half, we did almost everything opposite from what everybody told us to do, but it felt right to me. So when I said they had no relevance and credibility, I think so often, again, we're conditioned to look for that next 7-step system for success. We're so conditioned to believe that because we're stuck and we're repeating the same cycles in our life because we have the wrong strategy and tactics in our life. Right. When we talk about going inside, what I really mean is what keeps people stuck is not the strategy and tactics. It's the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning. And so each one of these individuals, the reason they had relevance and credibility to me is they spoke to an emotional trigger, a behavioral pattern, an environmental condition that allowed me to see myself the way I was operating a little bit more clearly. And so that is what really started to allow myself to lean in. But again, I had to have my wall down enough for me to be able to receive the feedback that I was getting on what I needed to hear, not wanted to hear.
Right.
And I will tell you that the faster we're able to listen to those things, particularly when we ask for them, process them, apply them, and understand what they mean to us, the more effective we're going to be in escaping some of those patterns. So Ben was a really implemental force. And then my wife and bride, I mean, here's the thing, man. When we're sitting in that car on the way to pick up our kids after a weekend that was just magical, and she asks me how I'd feel if I didn't have to go to an office on Monday, right? Literally, she's like, how would you feel? I was flooded by my fear, drowning in my doubts, swirling in my sorrows, literally instantaneously. And I had to look over and be like, babe, what are you talking about? Right? If you get a reaction to news that's there, if you react emotionally to something, you tie energy, positive or negative, to something, start listening to that because it's pointing you at what's important. The fact that I retreated in myself, started to get a little defensive, told me, again, because I listened to my body and all of these things, pain, that's how it shows up.
Yeah.
Pain points us at what's important and gives us perspective if we're listening. So I had to at least lower my wall enough to hear what she was going to say afterwards and then determine whether or not I wanted to invest in it further.
Right.
So are we allowing our wall to be down? Are we allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to be able to receive and process information? And then also, are we listening to our guts, our feelings, our triggers, the way that we actually respond or react in those moments? Because you know if someone has relevance or credibility, you also know if you feel like you're being sold. I never would on the coaching side lean into somebody who was trying to sell me or convince me. Ben never did those things. There was just complete alignment. So we know when things are in alignment and we know who we are, all the more important reason that we need to continue on that journey to see who we are.
Yeah. Take me through also, because we talked about before at the beginning of this episode, how you have a unique story. I have my own unique story, but I think that people sometimes psych themselves out that I'm just a normal guy. I had a normal upbringing. I had a normal life. I live a normal life. I have a normal girlfriend. I have a normal job. I have all this normal stuff. But that does mean there's no story there. But I agree with you, but I know that there's people out there. I mean, I was one of them before, 2 years ago that just I'm just an average Joe. Who would ever want to listen to me? update that people are listening, so that's cool. But like, how do you kind of make them see, like, I know it's the self-worth kind of thing, but take me through that. Like, how do you like try to unpack their experiences in their life and make sure that they know that, I mean, we've said it on this show a million times, like everybody's got a story, somebody needs to hear it. So how do you kind of like take them through that and get them to that point where they're ready to be vulnerable like we are, you know?
Yeah. So it starts in small moments and it incrementally builds from there. Right. So one of the things that I just will work with people who struggle with vulnerability in general, because that's really where it starts, to start to recognize that we have more connection than we realize, is to just start in small moments. Right. Start with somebody that you're already comfortable with. Start with a relationship, a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. Right. Wife, kid, and just share something that might embarrass you a little bit. Like, just try it. It's a safe space. Yeah. Very likely, depending on who it is, try it and see. Right. And then take it to a circle a little bit further than that. Maybe it's not that trusted circle. And what you'll start to notice is when you share things that connect to the human experience, things that relate to people, they light up. We're so conditioned to keep everything like surface level. Yeah. Nobody really likes that. Everybody hates like the BS, like coffee talk, going to happy hours, going to like social events. And it's like, what do you do? How's the weather over there? Like nobody really gets anything from that. No. Right. And if they say they do, then cool, let them go live in that space. But I will say that like genuinely, most of us don't. So we know when it lacks depth. We know when it lacks connection. So to lean into being vulnerable, that's like one of the techniques. And I think that sometimes it's a chicken or an egg. Do we start sharing our story to become more vulnerable, or do we try to become more vulnerable to share our story? Right. I think it totally depends on the extremity of the story and what type of relationships and upbringing you've had. Each person's going to enter into that world a little bit different, right? So I had the opportunity to be way vulnerable on stage as it related to external things that I could be safe sharing around my story that might not have the same depth in things that I talk about today way back when. So I was comfortable in front of crowds. Right. But it wasn't well into my 20s when I told you that the vulnerability and authenticity started to come into place that I started to actually share things in a one-to-one capacity, which was way harder for me than hiding behind words on a stage. Right. Right. And so for me, it was harder for me to do that in a one-to-one capacity than it was on stage. I'd say for both groups, your story is enough. Yeah. Your story is worthy. And by the way, especially if you put the label of normal on it, think about how many people you can relate to, right? You might think, oh man, my job loss isn't that big a deal. How many people have lost their jobs in the last few years? You might think losing your house is not that big a deal. How many people have lost their homes in the last 15 to 20 years, right? Little things. You might be like, oh, I got in a car accident and I didn't really get that many injuries, but I've got emotional effects from it. Great. Do you know how many people probably have experienced that? The thing is so many people don't know that their story is there because they've been so conditioned not to share it. Yeah. So whether it's on stage, on a podcast, in a one-to-one conversation, all I ask is just start with little small things that you'll still be safe, but might make you feel a little silly. Yeah. Because that's the greatest way to lean in. And now for me, if I ever hesitate to share something publicly, that tells me I'm operating an ego-based consciousness. I'm worried about being judged. And I'm like, well, shit, rip off that Band-Aid. Let's go. Because that tells me that's the place I need to work next. Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. I mean, I think it's just so interesting because it's like with anything. I mean, like I played baseball in college. Like you didn't just show up to the field and just start playing. You had to practice. Duh. Yeah. Right? Doing this. Like my first few episodes, you can go, I always say this, you can go look at the first few episodes on YouTube. Like they're trash compared to what I'm doing now, but I just put the reps in and just started doing it and sharing more and talking to more people and getting more vulnerable myself on my own show and on other shows as a guest like you're doing. Like, I mean, those are ways that you practice it. And then all of a sudden I started seeing those things happen in actual life. I mean, like you're in Arizona, right? Arizona? Yep. Yeah. So I'm in Jersey. You're in Arizona. We have never met before. This is the first time we've ever actually spoken, but I'm just putting it out there and you're putting it out there and we don't know each other from Adam, but it's great because we're just two people that are just sharing our story, which I think is fantastic. I love that you said that though, because it's totally about the reps. And that's something that I deeply agree with. I mean, if you went down the rabbit hole, you might have stumbled on some of the old school Bogert's bullets from like 6-7 years ago. I watched the very first one just before you got on here. Yeah. So you'll see I'm a different person on screen than I was then. Right. Right. And so the thing is like, that's also part of it is that there is no final destination. There's only a constant evolution of self. And so the more and more you lean in and the more reps you get, I mean, honestly, over 7 years, you can see on video footage, the progression and transformation and who I was around the same timelines that I'm even giving you in stories. Yeah. Right. So you can match it up for yourself. But the fact that you did that, you're like, yeah, this podcast is nothing like it was when I started. Guess what? Because all you have is what's in front of you. And then you've got to prepare yourself and go through those repetitions. That's beautiful the way you said that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So also, like, when we're talking about these things, this is gonna be my last question before we get into our closing segment. But, you know, this is gonna be like a very like broad question, and I hopefully it lands. But do you ever, like, we talked about earlier in this episode how you weren't necessarily like seeking attention, and for a good portion of your life were avoiding attention, and now you're basically, not that you're an attention whore, but you were just like all about attention because you need to put your story out there because you know it's important, you know people can resonate with it even though they didn't go through the same thing that you went through. But do you ever like be able to kind of look at those two things and kind of see how far you've come and how much that maybe means to you over the course of your life?
Yes. And that's a phenomenal question. And I think it absolutely landed. Never been asked that before.
Oh, I love that. I love getting that response. Cause I mean, I want to know, like,
I've never been asked that. And I think that's a phenomenal question.
Thank you.
I got to be honest. I still don't like the attention. In fact, the more out I've gotten, the more I've realized how much of an introvert I actually am. So the bigger the platform and the amplification of our message, our content, and all these things, the more I think in some ways I've retreated into myself in certain moments, which has given me more clarity.
Right.
So it's something that still turmoils me because I don't want it to be my name that creates the impact. I'd like to be the tide that raises all ships, but I don't want to be the singular ship in the harbor.
Right.
Right. And so for me, it's about amplification and attention primarily for impact. And so when I can see it being something bigger than myself, bigger than the vanity metrics, bigger than like, oh, how many followers do I have? It's also part of the reason, excuse me. It's also part of the reason that I have a team that helps with social media stuff as well.
Right.
Because it allows me to stay centered in who I am and how I'm doing. I respond to comments. I'm involved in the strategy, the distribution, and the content, but I'm not the one that's posting all the time. I don't review and watch all the videos anymore because the reality of it is all I'm going to do is become more aware of all the ways I should be judging myself versus focusing on ways that I can be creating more impact.
Yeah.
And so the bigger my platform has gotten, the more I separate from the product that actually gets sent out, if that makes sense, the content that gets sent out.
Yeah.
Because it actually allows me to just be pure and in the moment versus trying to refine or become something based on what I believe I said in one moment being wrong or incorrect.
Right.
It's also connected to my ability to raise my consciousness. So I've been working with a meditation and consciousness coach for about 2 years. Very, very deep intrinsic work, and it's been phenomenal. But what I've recognized then is when I first started, if you look at Bogert's Bullets versus where it is today, Bogert's Bullets used to always have a structure, an intent. I had to deliver knowledge. As I've raised my level of consciousness, what I realize is that it's truly in the surrender, and it's about actually allowing wisdom to flow through me versus having to access knowledge. And so I don't prepare for Bogert's Bullets other than maybe a question or a theme. I'll turn on the camera and I just get present in the moment.
Yeah.
Right. And I realize that the more I'm able to do that, it's actually more powerful content as well, because it's more authentic to who I am. But I constantly am in that divide because, brother, man, I did not want to be the face of what we were doing. And I fought it for a while. And it was only after multiple levels of feedback and people being like, dude, you have to be the face because of who you are in your story, that I started to lean into it. But now the only desire to grow and be known is because that to me is an indication that we're starting to reach the level of impact that we desire.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a lot of similarities there. Like I feel them just as you're talking, because like when I started this, very similar, like this was a 5-minute show. And it was 3 questions. I would literally read my intro, read my questions, read my outro. The guests would have the questions beforehand. A lot of times they would read their answers back to me. So it was like 2 people on a Zoom call reading to each other. So it was electric content, electric. But now, I mean, like we've been going for 45 minutes already, and I didn't write anything down outside of your bio. But it was just like I just wanted to get to know you and like just start talking and see what happens and see where it goes, because that's how you make some magic happen. And this episode episode has been off the charts as I expected it to be. And we could obviously talk. I mean, I could talk to you for the next like 3 hours, but I'm not gonna put you through that. I'm not gonna subject you to me for the next 3 hours.
Maybe we'll have to do version 2.0 at some point.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll do like a follow up, kind of like where are they now type of thing. But we're gonna move the show now into our closing segment, which we call Under the Spotlight. So the Spotlighters have been listening to Mike Hamm and Brian Bogert talk for the last 45 minutes. And we've touched on a lot of stuff, a lot of great stuff, a lot of different things. But if you could boil it down into one thing, like what would be the one thing that you would want the Spotlighters to walk away from this episode with, so you are under the spotlight?
I think there are a lot of people, particularly after these last 18 to 24 months, that are waiting for a hero, that are waiting for a savior, waiting for somebody to come in and just save the day, make sure that they can, feel a little bit better about what they're doing. But the reality of it is, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm also going to be the bearer of truth. There's nobody coming. Nobody.
No.
Right? There's nobody coming to save you. And so instead of going out and looking for that next 7-step system for success, that next shiny object, that next get rich quick, or the how do you actually get to know yourself better type quizzes that don't actually give you any clarity or transformation, right? I want you to recognize that the fact that you're listening today, the fact that you're here and absorbing this, means that you are a survivor. It means that you've handled everything that's been thrown at you for your entire life up until now. The pain, the despair, the lack of worth in moments, people beating you up and telling you you're not good enough, feeling like you just always constantly, if I just get here, I'll be okay. We all understand what that feeling looks like, but the fact that you're here says that you're surviving, and the fact that you're consuming content to make yourself better says you're investing in yourself to thrive. So instead of searching for a hero, instead of searching for a savior, I instead usher you to serve and search for a guide. That is not a pitch to go get a coach, because I think 98% of people aren't ready for coaching. But a guide can be your spouse, can be a kid, it can be a parent. Start asking questions like, hey, if you saw one thing that I do in my life that you could unplug and put into your life, what would that be? If you saw me doing one thing that was creating damage or destruction in my own life or the lives of those around me, what would that be that I could remove? Start asking questions to get a guide to help you see yourself more clearly. When you do that, you will lean into who you are, and you will be your own hero. You will be your own savior. And that's how it's designed to be. And so here's the reality. Move people, move people. I'm just asking you to move. I'm asking you to use your stories and your lessons to move and share them freely, because you will move people and you'll be a part of this collective impact that we're trying to generate by 2045.
Love that. Amazing Under the Spotlight. I love Under the Spotlight because that's where we get the bangers. Like, that's where the best, not that the rest of the episode wasn't epic, but that's just like, I loved that Under the Spotlight. So if people need to learn more about you, find out more about you, look at more of your content, where can they go to find that?
Yep. So I said to you in the beginning of the show, we're excited. We actually just relaunched and actually launched for the first time a free course. We know that to impact 1 billion lives, 99.99999% will never pay us $1, and we're very okay with that. So we create a lot of free content to elevate and empower. Go to nolimitsprelude.com. You will get access to a free course that's got over 30 minutes of video content. It's going to talk to you about concepts like embrace pain to avoid suffering, emotional triggers, the elements on things that actually help people see who they are. And so this will be a great resource for you. If you go to @BogertBrian on any social platform, you can follow us there. BrianBogert.com, IamNoLimits.com. You can find us if you just Google our name and what we're doing. And I don't say that for any other reason other than I just know there's a lot of content out there. And I'm hoping that some of you will Google it to find it and get more eyeballs onto it. Right. But we just really want to help. And again, it's not about the vanity metrics. It's about the impact.
Absolutely. So I will make sure that I put all those links in the show notes, along with themorningspotlight.com and themorningspotlight@gmail.com, which are the website and email address of the show. Brian, this was amazing. I really appreciate you coming on with us today. I know the Spotlighters got a lot from this one. I know I did for sure. But I really appreciate you coming on with us today.
Man, thank you for building the platform for me to be able to pour good into the world. I wouldn't be here without you. So thank you. And I guess thank you to Steve Sims, because I wouldn't be here without him either. So
yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully I didn't make him look too bad.
No, you made him look great, honestly. And just, I love this episode. This was fantastic. And the Spotlighters, hopefully you enjoyed this. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.